That was nice. I'll give you a chance to write your name on this one before I hand it out. Put the other one over here.
Thank you.
I wanted to get myself in the jam. Seriously? Now my computer decides not to restart?
Always at the appropriate time.
I know. It's just, well, I have to admit, it's been doing this lately. This is, it sort of gets in his modes. It really is dead. I'm going to have to restart it. All right. I do want to start on time, though. So. Okay, thanks very much. As I had given a heads up before, this is the Registration Protocols Extensions Working Group. This is our working session. We have 3 topics on the agenda. We have 2 hours. Each has been allocated 40 minutes to go through. I want to keep the introductions here short. I'll only observe myself. I'm James Galvin. I'm co-chair with Antoine Rashurin, who you should be able to see up there on the Meet Echo. He's got his picture up there at the top, and I see that we have a number of remote participants, and I think that's great. I'm going to turn this meeting over right away to Roger, who's going to kick off the first topic that he's going to go through. I will shortly get into the Jabber room as soon as I get my machine rebooted. It has decided to go crazy here. So I'll simply help moderate the discussion, keep an eye on the Meet Echo and the Jabber room for people who want to make comments and have them read out and try to help manage the queue as necessary. But otherwise, I'm going to let Roger and then James, take care of their meeting and their discussion themselves, as we've done with interim meetings in this working group. Okay. Any questions or comments from anyone? The blue sheets are working their way around. Please make sure to sign in, find them. And if not, Roger, over to you.
Meeting, do we need to do note well?
I'm treating it like an interim meeting kind of thing.
That's fine with me.
But so Roger makes a good point. Just to be clear, right? As with all IETF work, I'm treating this kind of like an interim meeting, and we haven't made a point actually in our interim meetings of putting the note well up there on the slides. We'll certainly have it tomorrow when we have our more formal working group meeting and update. I don't know. I don't think I'm breaching any protocol by not putting it up on the screen, but I'll at least point out to folks, please note well, everything you say and do here, belongs to the IETF. And, we do have some rules and procedures about, what you say, what it means, what can be done with it, appropriate behavior and code of conduct. And you've seen many references to those BCPs and other working groups. You'll see it here tomorrow. Please do make sure to look at those so that we can all be respectful and honorable of what it means to be here at the IETF. So thanks for that, Roger, and back over to you.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so I'm here to run through registry mapping and hopefully get some conversation going. The last IETF we did this at in March, it was really good. We had a lot of good discussions. So today I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we're talking about, just in case there's some new people or some people that fell asleep last time, whatever reason. I'll give a brief overview. Then we'll get into some of the discussions that we had left open from the last meeting, and then end up with maybe some longer discussions on some of the items that hit the mailing list since then. about this. So, all right, registry mapping is a dream that I think at least one large registrar has, that will get registries to promote all of their systems in a consistent way. And what I mean by this is GoDaddy has a 30, 40 page onboarding questionnaire for every registry. So if you have a new TLD starting and GoDaddy is looking to sell that, we actually have 30 or 40 pages of 300 plus questions to ask every registry. And I mean, every registry operator, just because you're a registry doesn't mean you're doing the same thing for the next TLD. So, and one of the big reasons we do it is to try to get the same questions out of every configurable option. And I'll just bring up the one big one that I've been working on, is the fee document of, okay, the fee document prescribes how to run the fee extension, but it doesn't make explicit statements on the shoulds, the mays, and all of that. Those are options. And what a registrar needs to know is how you have configured your system. Is that a may? If it's a may, you actually implemented it, then let's know that. Some of the other big items that we're looking at this for is consistent language. Some registries call different objects by different names. Even with the questionnaire that we have, we send it out and someone will respond back yes to something that was supposed to have a name in it or something like that, just because their registry calls it something different. So it's one of the big goals for us as a registrar, is to get that naming consistent so that we're all communicating about the same things, as well as hopefully some discussions around this, getting maybe 80% of the configuration of a TLD documented in a consumable fashion, not in a SDK somewhere published on somebody's website that now that we have 200 registries that we had to go find. So those are the big goals for us anyway. I'm sure that the one consistent one from the registries is not to have to explain this every time, but an easy way to explain it. So as far as the registry mapping, how we've got it started is it's broken out into three main sections, really. One being the system, the generic system level kind of things, like password rules, things like that, connections, any of those kind of items that are pretty generic to an SRS. And then it also includes the zones, and the zone being, obviously the TLD that we are going to try to sell. So how is that zone configured? Are there any special issues with it? Two ways about zones. You can get a list of zones from the EPP, and then you can also delve deeper into it by specifically identifying a zone that you're interested in. And then the third big point, I think, on the three breakouts is the extendable mechanism of the registry system to explain all those extensions that everybody's using, launch phase, like fee, all those RFCs that everybody uses but has documented somewhere how they're using it. And this extension section actually should do that automatically, saying, yes, this is how we're using it. This is what, this term means for us. And it's not an option for this registry, but it is for that registry. So those are the three main big sections of the registry mapping document. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. Scott?
Scott Hollenbeck, comment. In the spirit of the note well, I do need to let folks know that I am aware of intellectual property associated with this particular contribution. VeriSign has filed a disclosure of that fact. We have not filed a declaration yet.
Thanks, Scott. Anyone else? Overview? Jim, you want to add anything to the overview? Yeah. Okay. Again, quick, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me or Jim after if you don't want to ask now. So, Jim Gould, not Jim Galvin. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to discussions that we had coming out of IETF 101 last the spring. There was a question about one of the items in the system. Was it in the system, Jim? The batch names, batch jobs. The name of batch jobs. The zones, okay, in the zones, yeah. So the name batch jobs, for some reason, was maybe a little confusing or not common enough, and maybe looking for common terminology for batch jobs. I don't know if anybody has preference here. From our standpoint as a registrar, and Jody can speak up if he has a difference, is everybody that we know calls it a batch job, so I'm not sure where that comes from. No? Okay. Again, it's something we can post to the list just to see where that was brought up from. Otherwise, we'll probably continue with batch jobs for it. So, yeah, one of the big questions, whether the policy extensions, again, the policy extensions being the description of how a registry implemented an RFC. So for the fee document, was this May implemented or not? So that's what the policy extension is. And a question came up last time was, should that be built into the original extension RFC, or should that reside separate? Right now, because this is a new concept, we think that we're going to keep it separate and let this thing live for a while before we make suggestions to say, okay, extensions should include this in a new section or whatever. So, Jim?
Yes, Jim Gould from VeriSign. Yeah, I mirror your comment as well. The fact that in creating the login security extension, I thought about, well, maybe it might be a good time to put the policy for the login security extension in there. But I really didn't want to tie that extension to this until it pretty much it's matured. In essence, at this point, I think separation makes sense until there's implementations of the registry mapping and that it's moving forward, and then reconsider it.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, let's let this get into the wild and get used before we start making those decisions. One of the questions came up was how to handle future policy definitions. And I think that what we came down to is let's let the future be the future, and let's get this implemented before we start making those big decisions or those open box decisions that we don't know of. So questions around bootstrapping. This was actually a fairly long discussion we had at the last meeting. And maybe it's because Registrar Steve may had a good side of this, because the goal being we want to automate this as much as possible, and it's going to be an EPP. So how do we actually get to that data early enough that it makes sense? So one of the problems that a registrar has is before we bring on a TLD to sell, we have to have a contract with the registries. And to get access to the system, the SRS, that contract has to be in place. So the chicken egg problem here is we have to have a contract to get access to the definitions of what they have. So the discussion was bootstrapping. How do we do this so that the definitions help the contracting process along, not the reverse way? And many different ideas came up, and simple ideas, simple as, well, just provide the response output in whatever format on email, however you want to get it to the registrars. As long as it's in the format, then the registrars know what they're looking for. If it didn't come across the EPP connection, from our standpoint, we weren't that concerned about that. I don't know if anybody else has concerns about the bootstrapping.
It's Jim Gould again. So yeah, we discussed a little bit related to different models of onboarding. One was kind of more manual. In essence, you would have a structured document in a document somewhere. That way you might be able to get that ahead of time, ahead of the contract, take that in and load it into your configuration manually. Then I would call it like semi-automatic. In essence, you might be able to have access to OT&E. You can dynamically pull it, use that, and then have what I would call 90% of your configuration, transformed from what was returned. And then fully automatic, which may be an absolute dream, but in essence, to be able to pull from the production system dynamically what the TLDs are, and to be able to automatically configure the client side. And in essence, at least for our systems, our monitors, our tools, and that sort of thing, drive off of registry mapping to be able to completely automate the configuration.
Yeah, and some of the issues on the different topics, the OT&E one, typically a registrar still needs to have a contract signed before they get access to OT&E. So we still run into that problem. I know that for full transparency, I don't like this idea, but it was brought up last time, and it was maybe a REST site that you can actually just hit REST and it'll produce this back. I mean, even if it's calling into the SRS on the other side, maybe just URL out there that actually does this that you get access to. Again, I don't like the idea. It's just another point to maintain. We already have an EPP system that we are maintaining, so let's not worry about creating another endpoint that we all have to attach to, maintain passwords for, make sure it's alive. So I just wanted to be clear that that was brought up. I personally, from GoDaddy's standpoint, don't like that idea. So, yep.
So, Jim Galvin, can you say a little more about why you don't like that idea? I mean, we're only talking about the bootstrapping phase, right? So having a place to go get it for that purpose seems reasonable. I'll give you a chance to respond first.
No, and I think that's a fair question. I think that's kind of what was brought up. Again, that would be just a bootstrap mechanism, but that is a maintenance point that now you have to maintain. You're going to have to get passwords for to get into it. You're going to have to, the registries will have to have that spot up and running all the time, not just, it's because whenever a registrar is bought on, so they're going to have to maintain a system forever that responds to that.
So, Jim Galvin again, I want to be careful to not suggest that I'm actually thinking about doing this, but in thinking about this bootstrapping problem a little bit, I mean, a couple of things occur to me. One is I certainly appreciate the idea that if you have a different place that you have to go to get this initial mapping, then yeah, I mean, as a service provider, you're now adding yet another thing that you have to maintain and manage and all of that. So that's certainly a point we're thinking about. But the more interesting point here is, and I'm wondering about questions from other people, comments from others, would this necessarily have to be password protected? Why couldn't it be freely available? I mean, in principle, you know about the registries, right? Is there a reason why you wouldn't want stuff to be there? Just curious.
Yeah, this is Jim Gould again. Yeah, adding another access point won't change the security around it. And in essence, whether or not you allow anybody to access OT&E or you provide another portal that has the same information, just another protocol doesn't really add all that much to the problem set or solution.
Okay.
Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. As far as having that stuff just open and out and available with no password, typically at registries, you've got to sign paperwork about software licenses and things like that, you know, sort of it's more than a click through EULA, but something that says that the information provided is under various non-disclosures and all that other sorts of stuff. So it's not like stuff that's just posted out on a website publicly. So.
Yeah, so just Jim Gowan, just a quick closing comment. I mean, I agree with you, Rick. I don't, just sort of trying to think through, sort of the maintenance issues or non-issues and whether they really were there. And I was questioning whether everything in the mapping really is private or needs to be protected or not. And I guess it's hard to say, but you're right. There could be some particular circumstances where there's something in there you really don't want to be public unless you're part of it. But in reality, it's just the operation of the registry. It should be something which you want people to know about. Maybe that's moving in a different direction than we are today, but just sort of raising that question to see what others think.
Yeah, Rick Wilhelm again. Yeah, again, it's not something that once someone is part of that relationship as a registrar with the registry, perfectly open to be sharing that. Typically registries are, but it's not the sort of thing you, like when you post content out on your website, at whatever your registry website is, and it's just open for anyone in Gen Pop to go see. So that's the only difference. It's part of a business relationship that you have with somebody.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Well, let's move on to some of the items that have hit the list since this is was done. Published. The registry mapping was published beginning of June 1st actually, and one of the policy, the first policy extension was published a few days later, early June, and we had a few comments on lists. Let's go through support of the host attribute model and the host element. Today it's not in there. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, one of the specific elements was not defined as optional. So in essence, if a registry did implement the host adder model, that they wouldn't be able to use the registry mapping based on it not being optional. So I think fundamentally we just need to look at how we would model it in a host adder registry. I'm not sure how many host adder registries there are out there. Maybe it'd be useful for one of those registries to take a look and find out whether or not they're able to effectively present their policy.
So that's a call for anybody that is doing that. Please hit the mailing list and let us know. One of the big ones too was standard statuses, and if registry mapping should account for non-standard statuses. Specifically, some of the ones called out was domain status, host status. There are registries out there that have statuses that are not in the RFC. Jim?
Actually, there was a message that came this morning that described this a little bit more. And the example was for RGP. In essence, if the only RFC that was referenced was the domain, whether or not it would include the reference to the RGP extension, which pretty much are substatuses off the base domain. So I think that's something that we could take a look at to see whether or not we're covering all the various RFC statuses. But I don't recommend us, opening it up to custom statuses that are not defined within the RFCs.
Thanks for the clarity, Jim. Let's see. Oh, okay. For batch jobs, getting back to batch jobs in the scheduling format, suggesting to use the Java EE timer expressions. We've got, I think, 3 now, Jim. three proposed ways to do this. Java, Cron. What was the third? Was there? Maybe it was just the two main ones.
Yeah, in the draft right now, it references, I would say, as a weak reference to use of cron.
Yeah.
I have to admit, it was kind of thrown in late. But yeah, there were two other options put on the list. One was the Java timer, and there was another one from Patrick. So I think we fundamentally just need to look at how to best define a batch schedule. And so if there's any suggestions or any strong feelings anyway, please weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think we don't really have any strong suggestion on this. And it was, you're right, Jim, it was the ISO 8601 that Patrick mentioned. And again, I'm not sure that as authors, we have any specific direction we can, we'll pick one and just move with it unless someone has strong objection to it or a strong need for one of the other ones. So. All right, let's go on to the next topic then. Placing all the information under one element, the INF data. So it was suggested that we don't need the extension section, that all data should be able to go under just the one element. And I don't know if you want to talk to that, Jim, because that was.
Yeah, I see that, well, Patrick is on there, so hopefully he'll be able to weigh in on this particular item. But the idea, as I understand it, is that inside the registry object, the ability to define all of the elements under that object. So the only question there is that where would the extensibility plug in? In essence, would the registry object need to define a new extensibility area outside of what's defined in EPP today? So my position was just use what extensibility is already defined within EPP. And in the case of my experience with creating the policy extension for the launch phase, that's one example. So that is a extension of a zone. And then I have the login security extension, which into creating a login security policy extension, that would be an extension of the system. So if you think about the object model, you have a registry, which has a system, and then it contains many zones. And so when you're defining extra attributes, you can define where the extension point is, whether it be system or zone. So I'm not really exactly sure. It might be good if Patrick could describe how you would add extensibility to it if it's under one element.
If Patrick's available and can speak. Okay. We'll just hope that he gets on the mailing list and responds to that question then if he heard it. Otherwise, we'll post it back to him. All right. The next item was, no, go ahead.
So Patrick did post in the Jabber here, and he says that he will try to post an example later on the mailing list, but basically something like, registry object type equals RFC 5731 is the leading type, and then inside you would have the opening element, and then inside you have all domain policy items, and then you have the closing / registry object. And he just puts that in the Jabber room, and also a place for a type equals quote, draft whatever extension, and then inside the elements would be policies param for those, so etc. Anyway, he says he'll post it to the mailing list and fill that out. He also apologizes that he's here, but he can't talk. He can only hear.
No problem. Thanks, Patrick. All right, the next item that was brought up was deletion of unused objects, host and contact. It was something that wasn't thought about being in there. Definitely seems like a good idea to add, so we'll look at adding that. I don't know if anybody has comments. It's definitely something that we continually are working manually to do, things like that, so it'd be nice to get defined. All right. How about separate policies based on which IP stack you're using, 4 or 6? Does there need to be definitions for each different stack item? Jim?
Yeah, this is Jim again. So when I was reviewing that comment, I was thinking, well, okay, so are there registries out there that really have separate policies based on V6 versus V4? And my request is for those registries that do have separate policies, please help in trying to capture that in this. Because for us, we don't, right? So I don't want to speak for how to define a policy where I don't know how that policy is defined. So I believe that Patrick is aware of this. No, it's not Patrick. I forget who that was. So I don't remember. Anyways, the point is, please speak up and help out. And we're more than willing to accommodate it as long as it makes sense.
Thanks, Jim. I don't know, maybe I skipped this one because I didn't want to think about it, but I skipped a discussion that was had on A labels, U labels, LGRs, and if we should be actually being, I don't know, more broad and using, more specific in using LGRs versus just saying U label, A label, supported or not. It seems like it's a big thing to take on, and I'm not sure what use we would actually get out of that. I don't know if anybody has comments on that.
Yeah, this is Jim Gould again. So in thinking about it, the intent was to provide a high-level description to the client of what domain names are allowed, right? So I'm not sure whether or not going into the complexity of LGRs is going to be way too heavyweight for this. So if there are registries out there where the attributes cannot be used to reflect what is a valid domain name in the registry, then I suggest speaking up and providing some input.
Okay, next, let's go similar, I guess, here. A discussion on the use of loc, int, or as in some registries allow both 2 of each, one of each. Do we need to have more than just, hey, loc, int? Does it need to specify that next level of, okay, you can have 1 int and you can have 1 loc, or you can have 2 ints or 2 locs, or any comments, suggestions, questions?
Yeah, we actually, I believe we have like 4 of them in there right
Yeah.
now. It's like int, loc, int or loc, int and loc. And then the example that was brought up on the list was int required and loc optional, pretty much. And I'm not sure, maybe it's int, op, loc, I don't know. But the point is that there's only so many combinations that you can have. So maybe we just need to add 1 more and be done with it. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Jim Galvin, I channeling Patrick from the Java room. I missed an earlier comment from his, but focusing on this particular issue, he says here, no, you cannot have 2 ints or 2 locs, but see my example on travel in the mailing list. So he gave an example about that. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, you can, well, Patrick can hear. So it sounded like in the travel example that it was int is required and loc is optional because it was, I think all the combinations there, you always had to have an int. So if that covers it, hopefully it does.
So I'm watching for a comment from him on that, but if we can go back to the LGR thing for a moment. He made a comment here, LGR, if they're not used, why was the standard built for them? The idea was for them to replace the IANA tables at some point, right?
I'm just saying that in general, when we're talking about registry domain name rules of what's a valid domain name versus what code points can be used with a specific language or script is something entirely different. So I'm not sure for onboarding a TLD whether or not the registrars need that level of detail on a per script or per language basis. In essence, you want to know whether or not IDNs can be supported or whether or not you can provide a UTF-8 domain name or just a pure ASCII. Those are the kind of rules that I think make sense for registrar onboarding. I'm not sure whether or not the LGR is needed.
And this is Roger, and I'll just add, the LGRs are useful. I don't think they're useful in this context. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm wrestling with in my own mind is, you know, registries. I feel like there's a distinction to be made here between GTLDs and CCTLDs. You know, because in the GTLD world, we do all tend towards wanting to do things in a similar and uniform way, and managing all of that. And the problem is CCTLDs are just, you know, they're out there in the wild, if you will. I'm just sort of thinking through in my mind, gee, I want to be careful here that we don't obligate things that, you know, exclude those things, exclude the operation of CCTLDs and make things awkward. I'm probably not making much sense here on my point. I worry as a service provider that supports both, that I can't have a specification here that's going to make it hard for me to support both sets of customers. That's all. Go ahead.
Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign, don't the LGRs generate IDN tables? Right, so it seems like more of a meta tool than something that you'd be using at this point in the technology stack, if you will, right?
Yeah, I buy that too. So, and one other thing, just going back a bit, actually, Patrick made a high-level comment here in the Jabber room to call out, which is also a fair comment. And he says here, you cannot expect all registries to be there or hear about this work group. So we will miss cases. And I think that's kind of important. We suffer from that anyway, in general in this group, and I think we're aware of it, but I think it's worth calling that out. Putting my chair hat on for a moment is just reminding ourselves that we are a fairly small, unfortunately self-selected group, for better or for worse, and we're trying to do our part here to represent a broader community, but it ain't going to be perfect.
Yeah, Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. Yeah, true, and a fair point, but there is a good cross-section of the various, you know, ICANN-oriented and other groups, you know, like contractor party house tech ops and things like that. So there's a very good cross-section there.
We do try. He had one last comment down here. LGR IANA tables, Patrick says, yes, but not completely. There are things that you cannot encode in current IANA tables.
Okay. And I think to go along with Patrick's comment that you read right before that one, I think I completely agree, and it was my last thing I was going to hit everybody up for was more participation, especially on the registry side. Everybody knows how those are. So, I mean, you can take GoDaddy's document and I can send it to whoever wants it and realize how big of an impact it is to us. But from the registry standpoint, I think we would like to see more registries involved in this definition, just like that, see if we miss anything or something that can be, you know, accounted for. So thanks, Patrick, for plugging that early for me. Let's move on. Let's see. All right, so, go
Just a
ahead.
quick
Go ahead.
time check, so maybe only just one more item, just to be fair to everybody. If we have any other time left over, we can certainly come back.
Nope, no problem at all. And then there was a few, just a few quick ones here, because the general agreement on one. RFC, I don't know which one is it, domain 5371, domain one, states that domain null is valid for resetting auth info code. Something we didn't catch in the registry mapping, something definitely we're going to add into there, how to handle that. So moving back to registries that are handling IDs, specifically contact IDs, outside of 5733, independently, I should say, not necessarily outside, but there's some registries out there that don't use a passed-in contact ID and create one on their own. And it was suggested that that may be an option. Discussions are, if it's not RFC compliant, we don't necessarily want to try to do those things. But if anybody has, good arguments for it, I guess we'll have to look at it and see if that makes sense or not. So, Jim?
Yeah, this is a slippery slope. I just want to tell you, I mean, you have registries modifying the XML schemas, doing things that aren't according to the RFC, and then you have like a policy extension that is meant to define how it works. And then in essence, if it's not RFC compliant, can we really put through a standards track extension that would pretty much demonstrate violation of the RFCs, right? To me, that's just not a good thing to do.
Okay. One last one, since that was one quick. Login policies, there's been a draft published. You did publish that, right, Jim? The login securities, yeah. Draft, and there's a discussion of what pieces of that actually fit in maybe more the system level of the registry mapping. And I think we're going to have to take a look at that and see what makes sense to be in the extension versus into the registry mapping. So definitely something we're going to look at and see how that fits. So that was the last comment. Jim's got something?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So yeah, I've already have a makeup of the login security policy extension. So yeah, we can move in some of those elements into the base if that makes sense.
Okay. And I would just say again, please jump on board registrars too. I definitely bring this up at Tech Ops and see if we can get more involvement from the people that don't attend these meetings regularly. And hopefully we can. Thank you. If you have any questions, let us know.
Just a couple of closing comments from Patrick, just to read out here. So about contact IDs, I agree in the technical aspect, meaning not grandfathering deviations. But on the other side, if any small think it is not possible to encode in this new extension, registries will not use it. And you are back to the 40 pages of Excel spreadsheet. If any small think, there's a word missing in there, small registries, not sure. And then he says, the question is really, which registries want to deploy this extension? Oh, any small thing cannot be encoded. Okay. But on the other hand, if any small thing cannot be encoded in this new extension, registries will not use it. And you're back to the 40 pages of Excel spreadsheet. So the really important question is, which registries want to deploy this extension? It would be better to see a lot or many of them do it, but if the barrier is too high, no one will. So I'm not sure really how we would answer that question, but that's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, since there's an opportunity for these registries to create their own extensions as well. So if there is some one-off sort of thing that somebody does, they can create an extension to communicate that to their registrars. The point is that by pulling in something that is a one-off into the base, in essence, that the base will get very complex very quickly.
Right. So maybe the thing to do is to take on board a comment. We add some clarity on this point in the document where we tell people, this is explicitly call out, this is the baseline, this is the standard. If you need a deviation for whatever reason, go off and add your own. And maybe that's a better way to deal with it.
Yeah, Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. Another thing that's interesting is that as registries start and evolve and grow, sometimes there are people at them that do things that they don't really realize the side effects or the impacts of that which they are doing. And so therefore, if there is a mechanism by which those sorts of things can get called out as saying, look, those don't fit into these buckets, that is the general consensus, and therefore you have to go into an extension mechanism, sometimes it can help also reduce the gratuitous variability that can sometimes creep in just because folks unwittingly don't know what the norms are.
I agree with you, Rick. I'm laughing up here while you're talking more because there are people who do it because they don't really care. But facilitating something better, and just for the record, Patrick says in the Jabber room too that he agrees with the suggestion that I was making about as long as it's possible to easily extend, then and we should just clarify that. That's all.
Okay. And I'd just like to say, in this registry mapping, we're not expecting it to be 100%. If we can get that 40-page document down to 2 pages or a phone call instead of the 6+ weeks that it takes today, it would be a much better process.
Okay, so with that, we'll move over to James Gould. If you want to come up and you can stand in the pink box if you like, or you can sit at the table here. Yep, and actually, if you sit at the table, then you can move your slides yourself here on the screen there, and that would be good too.
All right. Yeah. So actually, we've had a lot of discussion on this today. And what this is talking about is the unhandled namespaces. Let me scroll down here.
Yeah, you're going to have to.
Okay. Yeah, so where this originated from was we were going through the working group last call on the change poll extension. And Martin Casanova brought up a really good point where I really didn't have a good answer to, just to be honest with you. I didn't think about it. The fact of the matter is that if you're creating a new extension that finds a new poll message, and if the client logs in and their login services don't support that extension, what should the server do, right? In essence, since it's a poll queue and it's a top message on the queue, do you not allow them to consume that message because they're not going to support it? Or in essence, would you return it independent of their login services? That's where it comes down to, right? So the discussion went towards really what is the purpose of the greeting and login services in the base EPP-RFC. And the end result for the change poll extension is that this is not unique to the change poll extension. This exists in other extensions as well. And so we wanted to have a broader discussion around this problem and not hold up the change poll extension because of this. So as a working group, we really have 3 options. One is we agree that there is no problem with the server returning back services that are not included in the login services of the client. In essence, we don't have to do anything. The second is we agree there's a problem, but it's not a big enough problem for us to come up with a common solution. And then the third is, there's a problem and we should fix it. So let's come up with some common approach to address it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump into the language in the RFCs, because this is what we're kind of living by here. So if you look at the definition of the EPP greeting, pretty much it says it identifies the services supported by the server. That's pretty basic. If you look at the login services for the client, it identifies the object URIs being managed during the session, and it may contain the extension URIs that would be used during the session. right? Now, it doesn't say that you can't include other things, but I think that's kind of implied. So in essence, if the server is saying, this is what I support, and the client says, this is what I support, how strongly do we enforce that? So really what it comes down to is that should the server accept objects or extensions provided by a client that is not included in the greeting services? An example of this would be, what if the client sends an extension to a domain command that's not included in the greeting services? I can tell you from our perspective, we would fail it, right? And there's an error code to represent that today. But there may be registries out there that would ignore it. That may be valid as well. But if you interpret the definition within the RFC, what should occur? And then if you look at the last one, should the server return objects or extensions to the client that are not included in the login services? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down here. And I had said that there are other extensions that that have this same issue. We cover the change poll. There's a poll message in the launch phase. There's a poll message in the key relay, right? There's been discussion around the DNSSEC extension as well. There's language in that RFC associated with transitioning from DNSSEC 1.0 to 1.1. There's language in the registry fee extension related to what to do if the client does not support the registry fee extension. And there's also language within the bundling extension. So the point is that this is not unique to the change poll. It's not unique to poll messaging. And there's been discussion even today related to the desire for clients potentially to get information to know that before they may not even support it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pop down to revisiting these options, and I really want to hear from you on this. So the first option is that there's no problem. In essence, the RFC supports servers returning back services that are not included in the login services of the client. The other is there is a problem, but it's just not important enough. Nobody has really gotten hurt from this. And then the third is it's a problem and we should come up with a solution for it. So are there any opinions on this?
Scott Hollenbeck here. So Jim, when you first started, you asked about intent. At least I heard that word mentioned. And as the guy that wrote that text, I can tell you what the intent was. This is intended to be a handshake, right? Where the server says, I do these things. The expectation would be that the client would then come back and say, that's great, you do those things. I wish to take advantage of either this subset of those things or the entire set, right? And so it's kind of similar to the server saying, hey, I speak English and French. The client saying, I speak English and German. Well, if the client then tries to talk to the server in German, the server doesn't understand that, right? And generally, you're not going to get a response. So in the case here, I think there would be a problem if the server says, I do X, Y, and Z, or Z, I'm sorry, we're in Canada. And if the client says, I do X, Y, Z, and A, well, at that point, the server should say, well, that's great, I don't do A, so we aren't going to have a session.
And actually, let me jump in on that, Scott. So some of the scenario as well is the fact that if the client specified a subset of what the server provides, and the server must return back something that the client does not support, what should occur?
Yeah, interesting scenario there. Again, what I was originally thinking when I did this was if, for example, if the client said, well, hey, look, I don't do contacts, for example, let's just take an extreme example, right? My thought there was that the server would then not attempt to push contacts onto the client, right? Because the client has already told you, hey, I don't speak that language, I don't understand it, so don't give me something I can't consume. Now, this gets a little bit more interesting when you're talking about extensions. But having said that, I think that was the spirit initially, right? right? It's a handshake, it's a negotiation where I do this, I do that, and the idea was that a successful login would mean we have agreement on the set of services that we both understand and consume.
And both should honor that.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ulrich from IIS. I'm not actually really sure that this is a problem at all. And so at our registry, we have, I posted on the mailing list, but I just, so for the benefit of everybody in the room, we have basically registrars who fall into two categories. One is we never poll, just don't care. And the other group is we poll, but we don't care what's in the message, we just throw it away. So the very few that actually care about the messages, they are able to validate these messages and they support all the extensions and we don't have a problem. And I'm not really sure that the registrars that actually do validating will have a problem because they're doing this on purpose. They have thought about all this and not just, oh, we do EPP because we have to. So I'm not really sure that there is a problem we need to fix.
Well, I think that what's interesting is that if poll messaging is being used more, for example, change poll, I can see a lot of uses for that particular extension. So if there's more useful information in the poll queue, right?
I'm totally with you. I think that these messages are really important. I'm just saying that our registrars don't agree with this view. So I have registrars who ignore poll messages, but will do domain and contact info for all their objects several times a month. Why that is a good idea is beyond me, but what can I say?
let me ask you from a protocol perspective, what do you think? Do you think there's a problem from a protocol perspective, independent of what the registrars are actually doing today?
Yes, of course. I mean, of course.
So you may be
as Scott said, I think the wording in the RFC is quite sure that the login and greeting are a kind of negotiation about what are we going to use, and so.
So are you like number 2? Is that where you feel you may be? There may be a problem, but it's not important enough to fix.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
This writer, and I guess I'll have to kind of agree with that. I think that there's probably technically a problem, or could be a problem. But as a registrar that does process these, we don't have a problem if things got on there that weren't supposed to be there, because we have code that handles that. So I think I had another point, and I'm trying to remember what it was now. Outside of poll messages, though, is this a problem?
Well, on the list, it was communicated as such, like, for example, I think it was Patrick that was saying, well, if the DNS extension was not included in the login services and the domain was DNSSEC enabled, should the registry return back the extension? And I would say no. That's based on the protocol, no. But they may. There's language in there related to transition between the earlier version of the DNSSEC extension and the newer one, but there's no explicit language because it's kind of assumed based on the base RFCs that the server should not return services that the client doesn't support. So we got 2 votes for 3. I'm not sure where Scott is, but I'm assuming he's 3.
Scott Hollenbeck. No, I wouldn't say that. I tend to fall into the camp of, if you get something that you don't understand, that's not a reason to go kaboom, right? And I see one place where implementations might not agree with that. I mean, if you're doing a schema validation, for example, and if your code is implemented in such a way that you get something that you don't account for and your schema validator goes kaboom, that might be enough to bring you down. I think if that happens, that's bad implementation. You should write your code in such a way that, that type of a data formatting or data consistency error gets caught and is addressed appropriately. So I think I tend to fall more into the camp number 2 here, and that what we might want to consider doing is simply writing some text someplace that gives guidance to implementers that, if this is the situation in which you find yourself, right, don't go kaboom, follow the Postel principle, right, now I might have this backwards, liberal in what you accept, conservative in what you send, right?
That's interesting. I come from a different perspective, and that may be because I'm one of the primary authors of a client-side SDK that does happen to validate. So in thinking through the basic assumption, I know the assumption is a bad word, but in essence was that the servers would honor the login services. So therefore, for example, in the client, it will merge all of the supported services with what is returned in the greeting to ensure that not more services are returned back in the login services. And in fact, if all of a sudden the server starts returning things that's not supported, then it will go kaboom.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact it will go kaboom, and there might be other clients that may go kaboom. So it would be, if you can't rely on the servers honoring what's in the protocol, then yes.
Yeah, and
Right.
truthfully, there might be a distinction here between what we expect from servers and what we expect from clients, right? So that might be something to consider as well.
Right. You want to go back?
Yeah, Jim Galvin, I want to go back to something that you commented on early up here. So I think this is, what happens if, if the client starts consuming things that it's not supposed to. And I want to just sort of understand that statement a little bit. So if it's consuming things it's not supposed to, is that because the server is giving it to it,
Yes.
right? So
Well, it's not that it's not supposed to, it's the fact that it's receiving things that it is not expecting. Right. And server's returning more than it said it supported, right?
Right, but what it means is it would stay in the queue. It would just sit there because if they never asked for it, then it sits there in the queue. I mean, that's the alternative, right? If you're going to do a strict adherence to what we think.
Actually, I cover that in a later slide. We'll cover through
Okay,
some of
then we'll wait till you
those.
get forward. All right.
And cover this one. Just from my experience in doing client-side SDK, if option one or
So let me just add a message from Patrick to read out from the queue, and you can take this on board too. Real life experience, he says. Registries happen to send messages not conforming to their own extension XML schema. Sad, but it exists.
I can't do much about that one. All right.
That's the other guy, right?
It's not me. All right. So anyways, if we went with option one or two, these are the side effects for potential client issues. The first is, as Scott pointed out, that if you have a validating XML parser, it will go kaboom. It will not find the schema based on the URI, and it will fail. And then you have a poison poll message, right? Now, the client could disable the XML schema validation, and our client-side SDK allows for that. Then we'll get to the next one. So the next one is that typically clients aren't using DOM directly, right? They are going to marshal it to domain-specific objects, and then that's where it'll go kaboom at that point. So generally, what will wind up happening is that there'll be a factory per namespace. It will look for the factory, won't find it, and it'll go kaboom. Now, the client-side software could make a decision, I'm going to ignore that, right? I'm going to see I didn't find a factory, and I'm just going to allow it to go through. But then you may have downstream impacts on not fully providing the information through that layer. So my main concern is that the foundation itself is not solid. And if all of a sudden we're accepting the fact that the servers can return this information, that the clients need to do defensive programming, you can't, you have to account for this, right? So, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump, oh, go ahead.
This is Ulrich again. I totally agree with the technical problem here, but how oftentimes will a client onboard a registry and not onboard the extensions?
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure.
I think that is just a problem that is not really there.
So, Jim Galvin, I mean, I guess building on that and kind of agreeing with you, I actually don't know for sure what we do in our OT&E environment. One of the things that occurred to me is, well, gee, you know, I mean, we would put an example of all the poll messages out there, and they should be doing that in OT&E, right? Shouldn't they? I mean, I actually don't know for certain we do. I would presume that we do. So I agree with you, Ulrich, in that sense. This should never happen. I mean, unless as a registrar, you're really not doing your job. I don't know.
But there's, you know, from a protocol perspective, there's no good answer to this. Somebody throws it out there, and in essence, as a good server, what should the server do, right?
I agree on the protocol perspective, but in the end, I mean, we all have only limited time in this life, so should we invested in this problem that only exists for very, very few cases?
And I will channel Martin Casanova here in the chat room. He says that I don't think creating a poisoned message is a good option. Only alternative I see is to not send any extension in the poll message that was not specified at all. You know, both cases are bad for registrars, but yeah. Anyway.
Well, this is what, if there was interest in option 3 and to come up with a common solution, these were the 4 items discussed on the list. The first one's really not an option, just want to point out, but just to complete it, server returns an error that will create a poison message. The second one is that you would create a specific extension of an unsupported extension, which is kind of a chicken and the egg. So create an extension to say that you don't support extension. Yeah, okay. Number 3 was the first, I would say, real option presented, which was to leverage the message queue message element to encode the namespaces that are not supported. In essence, you would filter them, you would put the namespace in the message queue message element, and then that way it's protocol compliant and the client's receiving the information that's what's not supported. The issue with this one is the fact that that element is meant for human readable messages and not machine parsable. And then Martin came up with a great idea. I really like this idea, was use the existing ext value element, which has two sub-elements to it. One is a value and the other is a reason. The value is contains XML. And the fact of the matter is that there can be many of these. So there could be one per unsupported namespace. So I'm going to cover these real quick, and we'll go through these. The first one was an example of, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Mario Loffredo from .it registry. Sorry, but I don't understand why do you say that if the server returns an error, this stops the processing of the poll queue? Why?
Because what would wind up happening is that they can't acknowledge it. So if it returned back an error, they can't get the message ID to acknowledge it. So if it doesn't return back the message itself and you can't acknowledge it.
You can queue a message without having previously made the poll rec.
No, the acknowledgement requires the message ID.
Yes, it is in the message queue element. It is optional. It's also in.
Are you saying to return back an error with the message queue element in it?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Every response. Also, an error response can include the message queue referring the first element, the first message in the polling queue.
Yeah. You are right. You could return back an error response with the message queue element in there, which includes the message ID, right? Or could you? Is that right?
Yeah, for me, it is possible because it is not written in the protocol that if you return an error, you cannot include the message queue element in the response.
Yeah, because I think it was a 1300 and 1301 related to whether or not there are messages or not messages. In that scenario, you're saying return back an error.
You can return an error and specify that you can the queue the message anyway.
But you just wouldn't return the actual extension.
At .at we have a realistic case that is the DNSSEC implementation because we are starting now and we have DNSSEC enable registrar and not DNSSEC enable registers. And we are choosing to remove the DNSSEC extension element from the domain info response, for example. The real problem in the poll message, I think, is that the response can contain only extension element, only the extension element. So
Right, no, I think that's technically feasible to do that. I think that you could return an error with the message queue element in the response. Technically, that would work, I believe.
Okay.
Yes.
Scott Hollenbeck again. So I need to go back to something Jim said a little while ago. Generally, implementations that follow the protocol are not going to have this problem, right? So we have implementations that follow the protocol, implementations that don't. Why do we think that adding elements to the protocol are going to address issues with implementations that aren't implementing the protocol correctly?
Well, I think the client is implementing the protocol correctly, right? And if the server returns back information in a poll queue that's generated by the server in this instance, right? That it does not know the services that the client supports when they eventually log in, correct? So if you have a change poll based on change to a domain, let's say, and then the client logs in and does not support the change poll extension. So the question is that what should the server do with that poll message?
Yeah.
All right, so, but this would be something that a protocol conformant implementation does, right? I mean, a protocol that implements whatever this proposal becomes.
No, the point is that it's not clear what the server should do. In essence, if you said that the client doesn't support that extension, so therefore the server should return an error.
Okay, so
Should it? What do you think it should do?
so the idea here is provide guidance to server implementers to protect themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the idea is that if there are server implementers who are not protocol conformant, they are going to continue to be a problem.
Correct.
Okay, so this would be a partial solution?
Well, this would get them in line if they
decide to implement it.
yes.
But we already know they're not implementing the protocol as written. So why would we have any sense that they would do this?
Well, we haven't discussed the approach that is recommended for them to implement, right?
So, comment from Patrick.
Anyway.
And I also have some questions that are coming up in my mind too, but let's do Patrick first. He says, not agree completely. If on day X, a registry starts to add a new URI to the greeting and the client does not use it and the login is authorized, hence this extension is not mandatory, then the client is conforming. But there could still be the problem of the server having a message with a namespace not understood by the client, which is good. I mean, what I'm struggling with here when I think about this is maybe to reframe, I think the point that you are making, Scott, is what problem are we solving? Who are we trying to protect here? Because as I think what Patrick's going down the path of here is, yes, implementations change over time. So while you might be completely synchronized when you first roll out, at some point, there's an opportunity for registries and registrars to get a little out of sync here in terms of who supports what. And the question is, what's the appropriate response when you run into something that you don't support? What I was starting to get to before, and then you said you're going to come later on, was, okay, so if I decide, as a server, if I decide to hold back the poll messages because the client didn't want to take them, what do I really do with them? I'm going to have to deal with that issue.
Right, and I do believe that 5730 says that the server can purge poll messages after some server-specified period of time.
So that can be a local implementation
Right,
issue and deal
right.
with it. Okay.
Right, I mean, so what I'm thinking there, as you mentioned, Jim, and I realize this would complicate things from the server perspective, but if the server is queuing, let's just use that word generically right now, poll messages that cannot be consumed by the client. When that session is established, if the client basically says, I don't speak that language, and they attempt to poll the queue, they should not expect to see a message in that queue that they cannot digest. Which means that the server should be filtering the messages that are available based on the successful negotiation of that handshake. Now, indeed, as you said, what that means then is that the server may be holding back messages that never get polled because the client never says, I'm willing to accept them. And the logical conclusion of that is that at some point, well, there may be valuable information they're not getting, okay, but they've said they don't want it. The expectation should be that the server has every right to purge those messages from the queue at whatever point they feel is appropriate.
But are you thinking that it would be like a priority queue of some sort, where in essence, let's say that you had a change poll message at the top of the queue, and then you had a transfer poll message, and in essence, the client didn't support change poll, that the server would go, yeah, the top one, not
Yeah,
supported,
exactly.
let's go to the next one.
Exactly.
Is that the deal? But then at some point, what would wind up happening is that you would have a set of messages that are not supported by the client, which will sit
And they're
there,
going to sit there.
and they, you know,
As I said, at some point then, the server has to take responsibility for defending itself. And if they feel that, hey, look, you've got, 2,000 messages you haven't consumed and they've been here for a while, I'm going to wipe them.
okay, well, while you're there, so let's assume that all the messages that are left are not supported. What should the server return? When they do poll requests, should it come back with an error?
Return in response to what?
A poll request. They did a poll request.
You don't have any.
Oh, so what you would do is you would virtually remove the messages in the queue.
Yep.
But how would the client know that there are messages in the queue that they can't consume?
Because they were given that information when they received the greeting from the server. The server said, look, I can process this other type of messages. Now, they're not getting an indication that there actually are enqueued messages there, but the assumption is if that extension is supported by the server, the client should expect that they may have messages queued that, extension messages queued for that particular extension. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think that it would be not very transparent, right? There's nothing in the protocol that would define that. It'd probably be better to say there are actually messages in the queue and return back an error that you can't get it because you don't support it. Right.
That's also a possibility, right? Yeah. Yes, if they say, hey, give me what's in the queue, instead of saying nothing, it could be like something, but you didn't accept them, right? That may actually be more effective. And that's a clue then, ooh, maybe I should go back and rethink what I did on the login.
Right. So, yeah, so in essence, if I jump down, I'm going to jump down past to the one that's the preferred one.
So, well, just to read out while you're scrolling there, what Patrick says in the room here, agree with James. I assume he means you. You've been doing most of the talking recently. This is not transparent. The registry can start enqueuing new messages with new URI, and the registrar is already in an EPP session.
Yeah, you wouldn't know.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know what the right answer is here. I mean, I agree there's a problem, and I'm sort of thinking through, is it a problem that we need to solve or not? I don't know. It depends to some extent what you're actually putting in the queue and what the significance of that is. Poll messages, I think, to some extent are, I'm going to use a particular term to put a particular spin on it, are just informational. So they're not transactional like EPP is, so where you actually have to deal with everything. And in that respect, it should be okay to just delete them. But that also means that as you create extensions for poll messages, you have to be careful that you don't overstate the value of that message. Because if you do, then we need a mechanism for dealing with the fact that things are enqueued.
Not only that, you need to deal with what should the server return. Like we talked about
Yeah.
filtering it and returning an error. And, there's different things that you could choose from. I'm just going to point out one of them, and I think this will work. This is from Martin. And in this particular, it doesn't show up there. Jim kicked it.
Oh, there it is.
We got it. We got it. Okay, just went to sleep. All right, so in this example, one of the ideas is the fact that the server can filter, right? In essence, if based on the login services, let's say the change poll is not supported, so instead of returning an error, it returns back the message with the message ID so they can hack it. And there's one modification on this, is that the fact that the X value element, that value element is actually XML. You can include the full block of XML of the unsupported extension in there. And the beauty of what Scott defined in the XML schema of the base RFC is the fact that the parser will not parse that and validate it. So the idea is the fact that the client truly does not support the change poll message. They can still get the message. It's not going to be in the appropriate place that would make it go kaboom by the XML parser. It'll be there. They can process it later. And if they get this message, it's an indication then that they need to fix something on their end, right? So the idea here is that, and the beauty of this as well is that there is one ext value that's a list. So therefore, if you had multiple extensions, you could have one per extension. So this is not hard to do. I've actually implemented it in a stub server. I have it, I can demo it to you if you'd like. But the idea is the fact that based on the login services of the client, the server can easily filter these, put them in the ext value element, and then in essence ensure that we're honoring the client login services.
Okay, so Jim Galvin, I guess I'll just speak and comment. I mean, I won't object to this kind of thing, but I think I'm just going to go back to the question that I'd raised before. I mean, what problem are we solving? And I just, I just don't see the value in this. I don't see myself wanting to do this. If the poll messages really are informational in that sense, the registrar is either going to keep up or they're not. It's on them to do the comparison of the login greeting and see if there's something there that they're not supporting and take note of that. And it's just my responsibility as a server to not put anything in the poll queue that I think is important. I guess I'm not even quite sure how to say that is non-informational. But I think we do that anyway in the standards process as we create the poll messages, right? So
But then what you're doing in the process is that you're going to be returning back extensions that are not in the login services, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to delete them. If they don't consume them, I'm eventually just going to delete them.
But you're not going to return back an error.
That's right.
Right? So you are going to return back.
But that's
right.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a problem that I'm solving that benefits me, right? I mean, that's a problem to the registrar because they're not consuming the messages and they should be. I'm trying to decide if this is a problem that I need to solve. And I think that's the discussion that we're having here, right? And so far, I'm not compelled that this is a problem that I need to solve as a registry. And to that extent, I don't know that I would want to do this or need to do this because it gets back to what Scott was saying earlier. If they're not implementing the standards anyway, well, who's to say they're going to implement this? This is just a sneaky way to get it in there, and they're not likely to see it anyway.
Well,
So,
hold on. You're saying they. It's actually
clients. I'm sorry.
but
We
it's-
should be more precise.
It's actually you.
Right.
So in essence, you are not following the RFC if you're returning back the services that are not
Who's the you? The client or the server?
the server. The server. If the server's returning back the change poll and the client said they don't support it in the login services, they are doing everything according to the RFC. You are not. So the question is that part of this
Let me phrase
is
that
how
differently.
would you do it? to
Yeah, let me
meet the
phrase that
RFC?
differently. I think the question there is, yes, the client is not implementing something that the server is expecting them to, right? And so the question now is, how much do I care about that as a server? Okay, I mean, if I care enough about it, then presumably I'm going to do something to make sure that all of my registrars support all of the things that I want them to have. That's an external, right, meta issue that's going on. That's the whole OT&E kind of thing. I'm going to roll out a new feature. I'm going to find a way to make sure all the registrars know about it, as clients know about it as a server. But other than that, if you're a client that didn't implement it and I'm giving it to you, if you're not interested in consuming it, the question is to me as to how important it is that you consume it. If I want you to consume it, then I should have gone through some kind of process to make sure that you did it. But I don't think that doing this is the way I'm going to make that happen. There should have been something external outside of all of this to make sure you implemented it.
Scott Hollenbeck, yeah, and Jim, and to your point, if you are publishing the fact that you support A, B, and C, and as part of the login, the client says, I'm only going to do A and B, you as server can say, well, that's great. Get out of here. I'm not going to let you log in.
Yes.
I'm sorry, for those of you who couldn't see the raspberry, I just demonstrated, okay? And that's the end of it, right?
I think so. I don't think that this is necessary, because I think going back to the thing, maybe there's a problem here, but I don't think the problem needs to be solved in the standard. I think it's a higher level problem, and I just think it's not something to do. At least I haven't been convinced yet. I'm open if anybody's got some thoughts.
But Scott has a point, though, that you could fail the login. Right?
Yeah,
I think that
that's the way
would
to
be
do it.
the proactive way to address it, not that it might be fun for the registrar to get their
Right.
login rejected. And then if you're not willing to reject the login based on login services, then something like this would be a way to approach it.
Right, which is why I said, just speaking as a registry, I wouldn't object to this if it existed, but I'll say the other side of it, which is I can't imagine that I would implement it, because if I want you to implement it, then I will make sure that you do, and otherwise I'll just delete the poll messages, according to whatever my policy is going to be. Because just going back to the whole thing, what problem am I solving here? What benefit am I getting from this? Anyway. Other thoughts? Anyone else have a view about what the right thing to do is? Yeah, let's hear from a registrar.
So to be clear, Scott, too, you're saying the RFC states the registry should not be putting messages in the poll queue for what the client did not ask for. You're saying the RFC state that?
No, it's not the poll queue. It is any response.
Right. Okay. Specifically, so if that's the case, then there is no poisoned records on the queue, or else the registry is doing something wrong.
Right.
Right.
No poison messages.
There's nothing a registrar shouldn't be able to process, because they agreed to process it on the queue, because because the registry, the server, is handling it correctly on their side. That's what you're saying.
Right. This gets back to the earlier comment way back in the beginning about it's not possible for a registrar to consume things that they didn't expect. If the server is doing its job, the registrar would not be able to consume something it didn't expect. And so you wouldn't have a poison pill.
Watson from Affiliates. So just to clarify, the original problem that you were saying that is the registrar is not going to understand, well, it's kind of said they're not implementing something that the registry will already define to do. That's the problem.
We'll return to them. The perfect example is the change poll message. In essence, the registry made a change to domain name, resulted in a change poll message, and then the client logs in and they don't support it.
Okay.
What do we do?
So back to our understanding is if we want to have the registrar to implement something, that would be the OT&E and stuff. So in this situation, I don't see it's a problem, because we'll do as much as possible our communication to make sure the registrar implemented that. And then if they log in, they're saying that we haven't done what you told us, and that is not a problem, because we will not create any message that anyone will not consume before we actually communicate that.
Yeah, but the thing is, out of band communication, that's not a guarantee from a technical perspective that you're not going to be returning things that are not compliant with the RFC.
So basically, I'm saying that we will not return anything that we have not communicated to the registrar before, and that is not a problem for us to solve if they're not knowing the problem they have.
So you don't see that technically you need to do anything since you've communicated it in a notice?
Yeah,
or-
because the technical solution proposing is to accommodate people don't listen to you. Okay, and that is not
Yes,
the
that's
area
correct.
that EPP should
Right.
solve. Okay.
Yes, and just to note, since we were talking about the registry mapping, one of the elements in the zone definition is whether or not a particular URI is required, just to let you know. So in essence, something like change poll would be marked as true.
Right. And I'm sorry, since I got involved in this conversation, I neglected to do the time management here. But we're eating into the last, we're down to having only half an hour as opposed to his 40 minutes for Francisco. Are you done or?
I'm done.
You're done?
That's good.
Okay, all right. This has been an awesome discussion. Very good thing. So Francisco's going to come up here and I have his slides here also. I will get them up. And folks remotely, it is true that we did just put these up while we were in this room. So you need to, if you don't have them, you can go get them now. I had loaded them up as this meeting got started. So Francisco, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. So hello, everyone. This is Francisco Arias from ICANN. I was asked to talk about potential new stream of work regarding RDAP search capabilities. So let me see how this. Oh, okay, I see. So the current RDAP search capabilities as specified in RFC 7482. I took the liberty to highlight two of the items there that I think are of interest for this discussion. One is you can do partial string searching using the asterisk as the sort of the wildcard, I guess, to match 0 or more mid or trailing characters. Another important thing for the discussion is that if the way you understand the RFC, and maybe I'm wrong here, and maybe I'll be happy to be corrected, but it seems like if you have multiple query matching parameters, there is an implicit OR to join the sets. Now, on the GTLD side of things, as some of you may know, there is recent developments made using there was a new specification pass for GTLD registries and registrars regarding the GDPR compliance. And one of the things that specification included was that searchability, which was previously something specified only for web GUIs, it is now also required to be offered in RDAP for those that are committed to offer that service. Not all the GTLDs committed to offer that service, but most of them are committed to offer this service. And so if they are offering that service, now the temp spec says they have to offer that in RDAP once RDAP becomes an available service. And as soon as you may know, RDAP is something that is coming to the GTLD spec. There is some work that is happening right now to finalize what we call the profile, which is a specific set of requirements regarding RDAP in the GTLD spec and space. And after that, ICANN will require the implementation of RDAP for both GTLD registries and registrars. So once that happens and RDAP is a requirement to be implemented, those registries and registrars that are offering searchability will have to offer it over RDAP too. A couple other things that come from the spec regarding searchability. You will find this is an spec that was not included in the temp spec, but it's referenced by the temp spec in a sense. The spec for the rest of the elements that are not highlighted here are in the register agreement, the 2017 base register agreement. Second bullet, I think, is simple and is already supported by the current spec. That's the search results are domain names that match the search criteria, so easy. Tier bullet is exact match capabilities on the following fields. I think exact match capabilities are not an issue. However, I'm not sure how we do regarding the searching on a specific, using a specific fields to search a domain name. By looking at the RFCs, I forgot the number, 7482, I guess. And it's not clear to me if the RFC, only the search parameters that are defined there are the only ones you can use, or if you can use others. But if it's the second, then I don't know how we have interoperability. But maybe I'm missing something. Also, regarding partial match capabilities, the temp spec, the register agreement by reference from temp spec, I guess, defines a set of fields that need to be supported, which is basically everything. And I believe we're currently missing the capability, for example, to do searches on domain names based on an entity that has a role in the domain name. So, for example, looking at the domain names that are linked to a domain name by because the contact with a specific name has the role of, say, admin contact. This is, by the way, something that the draft by Mario addresses. So that's interesting to see how that works. What else? And the last part, last bullet is the spec also talks about supporting the need to support search capabilities with the logical operators to join the sets with those three operators and or not. Like I said, in my reading of the RFC is that there is an implicit or, and there is nothing about and not in the search capabilities. So with that in mind, potential search improvements that may be of interest for GTLDs and maybe some CCTLDs, even if they are not, of course, bound by the contract with ICANN, they may still be interested in offering these capabilities. And so maybe we need to add some capabilities for supporting a leading wildcard. I'm not sure if that's the correct reading if my reading of the spec is correct, but the register agreement does not specify where the wildcard can be. My reading of the RFC seems to be that it does imply that it cannot be at the beginning, it can be in the middle and at the end. And another potential search improvement will be to support multiple occurrences of the wildcard character. And tier 1 will be supporting the logical operators and or not to join the set based on the search criteria at the client request. So the client can explicitly set what are the logical operators to be applied to the different search criteria. Also, and of course, this is subject to my understanding of the RFC. And as I said before, I would like to hear what you think. As I understand, there is no explicit definition of what are the search patterns that can be used with each object type search. So perhaps we need to define those so that we can have interoperability in the searches. And finally, this is not really coming from the temp spec, but I sort of remember that I think Scott or maybe others mentioned, and also this may be important given the recent discussion about internationalization just before this session. Maybe we need to check that we have proper covering of the internationalization in regards to search, since these searches could happen in for example, entity names. Then we're talking about Unicode, so we may need to look into this. I'm certainly not an expert, so I'm not That's why I put a question mark. Maybe we need to look at this. Not sure about it. And I think that's it. I had another slide about the privacy requirements, but I don't think these are really important for this discussion. So I guess I will leave it with this slide.
Scott Hollenbeck. Folks have heard me say this before, but what's in 7482 right now is a complete hack. And as the guy that wrote that text, I am not ashamed at all to admit that. Remember, this was we have been doing this, I think, for 3 years at the point. This was some of the last stuff that actually made it into the document. And I think we were all looking more to just kind of declare victory and move on, knowing that what was there was a hack and that we would need to get back at it and look at it at some point in the future. I would not be a fan of trying to add text that says, hey, we can also put this asterisk at the beginning of a string, right? And by the way, and you can also just do logical operators, because we're now moving towards a need for a more general approach to searching. And as just so happens, I'm a co-author on an individual submission that describes how regular expressions can be used to perform searching in RDAP. Any of you who are familiar with Unix-like operating systems understand how regular expressions work. And they get us everything there in terms of those first 3 bullets and more. Now, the syntax is a little bit more complicated, for the novice who doesn't understand what regular expressions are, but this is where software interfaces can be very helpful, right? It's possible to write code that abstracts away some of that complexity and makes it easier for humans to construct search patterns. So I would suggest that anyone who cares, to think about this a little bit, take a look. I think it's, I'm just throwing out some words here. Draft, Fregly, RDAP, Regext. Please go look for that, okay? The problem with bullet number 4 is that 7482 does not give us any type of query paths that let us dig deeper into like the sub-elements of contacts. If there truly is a requirement to be able to do things like searches based on zip code or reverse searches, like, hey, here's a contact ID, tell me all the domain names associated with it, we need another specification for that. It's just not there, and neither of those are included in that regex draft that I just described a moment ago. Internationalization improvements, definitely. This is definitely something we need to think about. And maybe not even us think about it, but like those of you who were in the internationalization review BOF a little while ago, what I was thinking while they were asking for volunteers, look, I'm no expert here, but I'm expert enough to know when I don't know what I'm talking about and when to ask for help. This may be a place where we ask for help. And remember now, John Clenson, one of the folks that was in that room, did help us a bit as we were looking at some of these concepts. The internationalization stuff that's in 7482 is largely there with the input of folks like John, Paul Hoffman, Patrick Falstrom, and other clueful people. But still, if we need to think about this, we need to leverage that expertise.
Go ahead, Rick.
Hi, Rick Wilhelm, VeriSign. There was a statement in one of the earlier slides about search requirements being in the temporary specification. And my search doesn't, no pun intended. Sorry. Control F. No, I certainly, I didn't have enough coffee to handle regex this hour of the day. So I don't see anything in the temp spec that requires searching based on all the reading in the temp spec that I've done. And I've been through it like 400,592.7 times.
So this may be a topic for or type of discussion rather than here, but just quickly on the RDDS appendix, I think that's where you will find it. There is a section regarding searchability that clearly says that RDAP is a requirement if you are doing searches, if you are permitted, etc.
So yeah, but there was a statement in the earlier slide that says that the temporary specification requires a bunch of search criteria. 1.2 says that if search capability, where search capabilities are permitted and offered, the registrar, the provider must ensure that the search is in compliance with applicable privacy laws and only permit searches on data otherwise available to the user. And so there's nothing that talks about binary operators or wild cards or anything like that. So maybe we'll need to cross up, because I'm not seeing, because the implication here, because the implication in the slides leading up to this was that, there's requirements that are coming from a policy body that says we have to do search, ergo we need to standardize something here. But that's not, I'm stating that I'm not seeing the policy lever that's driving that technical standardization.
So, Jim Galvin, and I guess in response to you, Rick, I guess the way that I had interpreted what's there, and so this becomes a pointed discussion, this is not the right group for this continued discussion, is I interpret this to say that if you're currently doing search and who is, then you now have to do the same thing in RDAP, and they simply added a couple of extra requirements there. But, that's subject to a different interpretation, and this is not the right forum for all of that. And I think that's where Francisco's coming from in this. In that temporary specification, that if you're already doing it, you have to continue to do it.
Yeah, it's quite a leap from that statement via 1.2 to the prior slides that we saw that we're citing the temporary spec as a lever, because I don't think that's accurate, candidly.
Okay.
But no, I
enough,
understand, Jim, what you're saying, right? So I'm parsing it. So.
And I wanted to put myself in the queue after Andy as an individual, but since I'm trying to watch other things up here, I can't stand there in front of you, Roger.
Andy Newton, Aaron. So we have kind of a form of this in our Who is RWS service, which kind of predates RDAP, but we still have it. And every time I've ever seen it used, when I look at what people are doing there, it's about data mining. People are trying to mine our data using these facilities. So I would caution that that's maybe one of the avenues that this thing will get abused for. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from working on this. By all means, if you think this is a good idea, go ahead and go for it. But you may want to consider also looking at some sort of authentication mechanisms. Scott probably has a draft on it that goes along with this. The other thing I would like to say is this is very complex. And so if this working group is going to proceed with something like this, I think that we need to think about some sort of structure where we can do rapid iteration on implementations before trying to get an RFC. The IETF is generally not good at that, but a working group can certainly come up with some process to kind of help with that. Because what you're going to do is you're going to have people implement multiple things, and you're going to find out pretty quickly that there was a difference between people read documents differently, and they're going to come up with some very interesting ways of interpreting that, and they're not going to be compatible. So you want some rapid iteration when it comes to implementations before trying to get final ink on an RFC. The other thing is, I actually would like to see what the privacy considerations are, that slide that you didn't want to show us. So, all right, thanks.
So it's not that I didn't want to show you. This is Francisco, by the way. But actually, you just made it on point for given the comment you were making. As you can see here, it says that resources should only include data that you as a user will otherwise have access to, and that also applies to the querying parameters. If you're, for example, searching domain names that are owned by certain, that have a certain name as the admin contact for a given domain name, given the recent changes in the utility space, anonymous user will not be able to do that because they will otherwise will not have access to that data. Well, I should not say in all cases. In many cases, let's leave it at that. The point is, you will only get access to the data that you will otherwise get access to, and you can only use data for querying that you will otherwise have access to.
In other words, the privacy considerations that apply now would apply to this, right? That's what you're saying? Yes. Okay.
So, Jim Galvin, no hats. I guess when we started talking about searching, I think I had all kinds of things that I wanted to say, but maybe I'll just frame it in the following way, which is I really want to understand what problem we're solving by doing this. I think Andy started to touch on this too. One of the reasons why you have searching is because people are just trying to get access to things for all kinds of bulk access reasons and other kind of obscure things. And I just generally have the view that there are better solutions to that problem than providing searching. I've always thought, so let's see, separating technical discussions from policy discussions, I've always thought that from a policy point of view, the requirements for searching were not quite right. And without getting into details here, the other side of it is getting back to what Scott and others have said here along the way. You know, the searching capabilities, this stuff gets really complicated. I mean, I get that there are tools that help some of this, but you know, once you throw internationalization into the mix, all kinds of interesting things happen to you when it comes to fuzzy matching. You know, when you've got multi-code point characters and how you match them or don't match them. And I'm really kind of nervous about all that. So I see us having a lot of discussion about what problem we're solving before we decide what we technically want to propose for searching. And I just wanted to put that out there for people to think about. I'd rather see us shrink and further constrain what searching is allowed than try to expand it personally. Thanks.
This is Roger, and I'll just add, not just complicated, but resource intensive. When you start searching, the amount of resources it takes is insane. But along that, to answer Rick's question, I didn't catch it, but then I kind of folded it back in my mind what Francisco said on those list of requirements. Number one was in the temp spec, and the rest of them were in the contract. And it does, I think, going back to what Jim said, it's based on if you have to do searching, then those rules apply. One part I didn't get out of that was no registrars have ever been required to do that, and the temp spec doesn't change that, so registrars still don't have to provide any searching, just exact match. So.
Yeah, if I may just build on that, that's actually a really good point, especially as we move in a new direction here of maybe RDAP with registrars. We're going to have an inconsistency here, but that's a policy issue, not a technical issue. So we got to be careful to separate that discussion in this room.
This is Watson Singh from Affiliates. On the decision on the piracy, I think my view, if you have piracy issue, not only you have to have access right for the data that you can access, and you can only to do exact what you're looking for. So my point will providing any searching while search or whatever matching is violating the piracy, because if you know what you're looking for, you should just look for exact match. And having any search is meaning that you are just digging into other people's piracy.
So this is Francisco Arias. On that regard, for those interested in GTLE policy, there is for there is, and you probably know already what's on the EPDP that is going to work on reviewing this temporary spec. It's probably a good place to raise these issues so that if you have some concerns about this type of service, I think that's the right place to where you can feed those so that they can take it into account to limit what can be done in searches.
So, Jim wanting to channel Jody from the Jabber room here, he said, Jody Colker, he says, I have concerns with how many domains will be returned. If a search is for the street address that is used for privacy, millions of domains will be returned. That will be, that'll add to the complication of this implementation. And I think, you know, now reverting to myself and speaking personally and building on this, this really is the question that I have. What problem are we solving? Before we get into talking about what kind of searching we think ought to be supported and ought to be there, I really want to step back and ask ourselves, what problem are we solving and what are we trying to achieve here? Because there are just so many issues, and with the new privacy requirements, I'm challenged by trying to imagine how searching is valuable. Because if you're really looking for bulk access, there's better ways to do that. We should be talking about something different, not searching. Anyway, thanks.
Scott Hollenbeck. Now, ignoring the meta question you just raised, Jim, okay, that's a long topic. But the question of how to control what gets returned, Mario Lafredo, Maurizio, and I have authored a draft that gives clients some capability for requesting that the server, sort and page responses. Yeah, I mean, it's still not something I necessarily want to implement in terms of returning 10 million results back to a client, but the technology certainly exists. And if we are inclined to apply that to solve a particular problem, getting back to your what problem are we solving question, we do have some options to consider.
Andy Dutner. So I just want to clarify I can't actually imagine there are legitimate uses for this. I can think of a lot of them. I just think that it's also ripe for abuse, and that's why I made that comment. Like I said, if people want to do this, I think they should be allowed to do this. But I think the question, it is a very good thing to ask the question, what exactly are we trying to do here? Because there may be better ways. It may actually be that the searching that we're being asked to do isn't the appropriate thing for the problem trying to be solved. So I do think that's an important question. I'm not trying to, I don't think it's meant as a stalling tactic, but it's like maybe there's a better mechanism. So.
No other comments or questions? Let me look again in the Jabber room here. Oh, okay.
Dimitri, just a quick comment. When you refer to temporary specification, I'm sure everybody knows the ugly four letters, but the things may evolve over time. So we must be ready for what's coming next, because the post-temporary, the post-GDPR ICANN approach to the data, and I don't want to bring this up, just want us to know that mentally we should be ready for that down the road. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'll comment on that more complete. Let me just see if you're done. Okay, so maybe we'll come back and close the session here in the large. Yeah, even the mention of temporary specification down here in some of this stuff is really a GTLD thing, not a CCTLD thing. And so, it's interesting that although we try to focus here on technical work, policy does come to bear on us, and we always have to keep that in mind and mention that to ourselves. And as Dimitri was just saying, the data model and things about it, even in the ICANN world and GTLD world, is subject to some change at this point as we move through the temporary specification, and it's moving into a new PDP process in ICANN. For those that know what it is, that'll convert it to a consensus policy. So there's a lot of moving parts going on right now. I think what we do need to think about, and I guess maybe the question is to you, Francisco, on this particular point here is, are you interested in bringing to this group a desire to make this a work item, talking about searching a work item? And you don't have to answer that right now, because we're going to have a working group meeting tomorrow. And so you'll have an opportunity to give the 2-minute update on what happened here, and then we can make that an ask of the working group as to whether or not it should be on our list and see what we want to do. All right, there's no other question about anything. The other guy, James or Roger, I mean, you had your 2 presentations. Any closing comments from you on your work or documents for right now? And anybody else have anything they want to add? Then we'll just declare this particular working session adjourned. I very much appreciate the 3 guys who came quite prepared, and we had a really good discussion. I think that's excellent. Tomorrow we have just a 1-hour meeting, but it is a full, relatively formal working group meeting. We'll walk through status of documents, talk about next steps, where we are with things, the charter and stuff like that, and do our plans for what's to come here in the near term, in the long term. So with that, have a good night, everybody. See you tomorrow. Oh, blue sheets, where are they? I see the one up front. Where's the one in the back? Just hold it up, please. And if you haven't signed it, please find one. Oh, I see them now. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for the remote attendees. Just because my shows me 2 hours and I'll go to that. It's entirely possible that, I mean, no, I had 1:30 to 2:30 on, I had 1:30 to 2:30 on my.
3 hours.
You had no idea how many inconsistencies I found between the agenda and, oh, it's